So, good evening, guys. Good evening to everyone. So, I'll just give a short intro about myself for a minute or two, and then we'll get into the presentation. The presentation, I basically put it into two parts. The first part basically talks about why I started this particular business, what are the challenges I faced, and what forced me to sort of look at exit as an option. And what happened during that journey is what I plan to share with you. And I also want to leave you guys with about three messages which would be crucial from your perspective uh, in case you are looking at an exit. So, my background is I basically started my career as a banker in State Bank. I worked there for about 4 years before I went for doing my management education. Post that, I've been basically in the software industry for a decade with a corporate, and then 10 years about running my own software company. So that's my background in short. So with that background, I mean, I will get into this presentation. So, I mean, I used to work for this software company called iFlex, which was basically a subsidiary of Citibank, which used to be running core banking implementation practice. Now, this particular company, was acquired by Oracle in 2005. Now, though the fundamental grammar between these two companies were almost similar, but there was a small change in which both these companies were conducting business. Oracle, primarily being a product company, the revenue model primarily used to be create a product, sell it so that you get a license fee, and then you collect the AMC on an annual basis. So iFlex also used to have the same model, but what happens in a banking product is, though it is called a product, it is not a plug and play. Project durations could be anywhere between 8 months to 24 months, depending upon the size and complexity of project. So there used to be an in-between piece, which was the professional services element, which Oracle was not interested in doing that particular piece, and they were looking at system integrators in the marketplace to take up that particular business. So when I came to be aware of this particular strategy which was running in Oracle, so I decided why not I start this particular business, because even though the system integrators could have a lot of money and might to reach into the market, they don't have one particular thing, which is the product knowledge and the legacy and the technical know-how of how to do an implementation. So with that thought process in mind, I said, let me go and start this particular business. So like any other entrepreneur, I mean, sitting at your home alone and with just a laptop, it was a very uncomfortable feeling to start with initially. But I mean, I was lucky, I had a great start when we started the business. So we were able to, position ourselves as I had depicted in the picture there. So we were not a pure play service company, but we were also not a consulting firm. We were somewhere in between a services company and between a consulting firm. So an upper end of the services is what we were doing, and probably at the lower end of the consulting. So we were in between that bracket. So the good thing was whatever we were articulating was accepted in the marketplace, that we are playing our game in that particular space. So these were roughly the triggers for me, to basically enter into this particular business. Now, I will give you some little bit background on what is the nature of business. This is a business where revenue is sort of primarily linked to your headcount, which necessarily means the more headcount you have, the more capacity utilization, and if you are able to reduce your bench time, you will end up with a higher revenue at the end of the year, in simple terms. So as I had mentioned, I mean, we were neither a pure play services player nor a pure consulting business. We were somewhere in between. So the domain knowledge which was required sort of to operate in this particular space was knowledge of banking and financial services, which was critical. along with your regular IT skills of Java, Oracle, and PLSQL. Now, coming to the next level, which was basically the engineering and the delivery part. So projects, as I mentioned in this particular space, like, if it was a simple project, it could take about 8 months. Or if it was a complex project, like, it could run anywhere into 18 months to 24 months also if it was a multi-country rollout. So, and this complexity used to vary across geography. For example, if it is a European-based project, it used to take a longer time. If it was probably a project in Southeast Asia or Africa, it used to take a lesser time. As far as the resources were concerned, it's not that you could recruit a resource and deploy them onto the project immediately. I mean, we need to, like, empower them with the product knowledge. So empowering them with the product knowledge, like, basically used to sort of take about a year. So you need to spend time with the resource, make them understand, like, how the product functions, and then, like, get them into the nuances of facing the customer, and then deploy them on projects. That used to be the model. Now, as far as the markets were concerned, see, basically we were a firm where we were, like, sort of headquartered in Bangalore and operating out of Bangalore. But we had sort of zero business from India. Our entire markets were basically in Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and in Middle East. So how do you now generate business if your markets are all abroad? So our focus was more on creating relationships through our distributor network. So we spent more time on creating relationships and also directly reaching out to some of the banks to take our particular service into the market. So our billing rates used to be in the range of about 350 to 700 US dollar per day, depending upon in which market you are operating. So given whatever my background in sales and pre-sales during my initial days, I spent a lot of time after setting up the company in getting the initial business and getting our partnership done in many of the markets, and, like, trying to ensure that there is a steady flow of business down the line. Now, basically what happened was, like, we started in 2007. So life was very good. Like, the first year itself, we could clock $1 million plus revenue. Our profitability was very high. And this sort of thing, like, sort of continued for about 6 years. We had a good time till about late 2012 and early 2013. But what happened in this meantime was we had the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008, which really put a severe pressure on financial institutions across the market. One of our major markets used to be in Europe. Now, Europe, we saw a big collapse of spending in the financial services space. Budget allocation, which used to happen every year in banks, used to happen. But what happened was we were operating in the back office space, and the money was being spent more on the mid office space. So money which was being spent on our space was going elsewhere. The reason for that was the regulators and the governments across the Europe and also in US. What happened was they came to the conclusion that the Lehman Brothers crisis was primarily triggered by failure of audit and compliance. So banks started placing a lot of emphasis on, like, having proper audit and compliance solutions in place. So suddenly we saw a dip in market for no fault of our side. But the reality was that, like, we were not able to win more business starting early 2013. We started, sort of feeling the pressure. We were thinking how to overcome that. So we started expanding into more markets, again, going and meeting more clients and so on. Now, as this was going on one side, as I said, the kind of resources which we happen to have in our company, like, they were not the plain vanilla resource. So you need to spend time with them, like, training them on the product before they could be deployed. Now, the expectation of the resources was, like, they were expecting a hike of 15 to 20% every year on year. I mean, if you don't meet the demand, like, they were quitting. So there was an attrition problem also. So on one side, your realization of the market has got frozen. And on the other side, the cost base was going up, but the demand for our service also had gone down post 2030. So we were sort of really stuck, and we were wondering, like, what to do or how to overcome this particular situation. So there were two options in front of us. One was either create another revenue line on the services space itself, or create a product and, like, try to create another revenue line. So we deliberated on both the options, and finally we decided that we will go the products way, primarily because one, the revenue was de-linked from headcount, and second, we had a good background in how to run a products business. So we said, like, let's put our risk on products, and we said, like, fine. So once we came to the conclusion that, like, we will get into the product space, we didn't go about it blindly. So we went and spoke to all our potential customers, and we tried to get a feedback as to, like, if we launch a particular product like this, would this be interesting to them? So the response we got unanimously from everywhere was, yes, we are looking for a similar solution and we'd like to buy such a product. So that gave us a lot of confidence, and we said, like, fine, let us go ahead and build a product in this particular space. So we sort of did a small pivot, in the sense, like, we were still keeping our services business alive, running it actively, because the revenue which was being generated from that actually was funding this particular product venture which we were trying to do. So somewhere in early 2013, we said, like, fine, and we deployed or we created a new team, and we started creating this particular product which we had in mind. So the product took about, like, 15 long months to get it up and running. And about 6 months prior to that, we had spent our time on marketing this particular product into various markets in Africa and in Southeast Asia. So we incurred a cost of about $800,000 at that point of time to create this particular product and launch it into the market. So post creating this particular product, what happened was, we were then staring at the reality of what the product business is. Product business, unlike the services business, you have a long gestation period. It's not that the moment you take a product, somebody says, like, no, fine, and he is willing to put a signature on the contract and you go on ahead, unlike a services business. So this was a long game. I mean, a long gestation period. It's very difficult when you build a product to get your first 5 or 10 customers, unlike a services business. So you need to play the waiting game, which we were doing. But what was happening was, we had created another team, and the cost of servicing that particular team was actually coming from our services business, which was also hurting our expansion plans on the services side. But we took the bullet and we said, like, fine, we will go ahead with it, and we were doing it. So we had created the product. Now this continued for whatever till early sort of 2014. But actually we could not make any particular sale of our product. So we got our first sale for our product sometime in mid 2015. And the value which we realized from that was not even a fraction of the cost which we had incurred on, like, developing the particular product. So we said, like, fine, I mean, let's not focus on revenue. Let's focus on getting the first 10 customers, and then revenue would flow in. Was our thought process at that point of time. So we went ahead with that particular thought process. But then eventually what happened was, when we started actually, like, I mean, our company, and, like, there was another company who were doing this particular business. But gradually, over a period of time, lot many players entered into the market with the same service offering. So the only differentiator in the market actually became the price points. So our realization of whatever that slab which I mentioned of 350 to 700 was not happening, and slowly those numbers started coming under severe pressure. The other pressure, as I said, which we started facing was our cost base, because of the employees' expectation that every year there has to be a hike of 15-20%. That was starting to put pressure on our P&L. Then the third thing, like, which many people don't accept or concede in the marketplace is, when you start off with the co-founders, like, everything looks fine and fancy and romantic. But when you start getting into actual business and start doing things, reality starts staring at your face on a day-to-day basis. And when things started heating up and the pressure started showing, I mean, we realized our thought process, which was there in 2000, was not the same in 2015. Of course, people and individuals do evolve over a period of time. But we found our views were not unanimous, and it was hurting the business, and we were finding it sort of difficult to pull along together. So at least sanity existed, and we had a honest discussion between ourselves, and we said so what is that we want to do? So we said what is that which is creating pressure at this point of time? One was the cash flows. The second was having more market presence and the changed market conditions. So we said let's try for two options. One option is try to get an investor to put in money into our business. And the second option is to see whether somebody would be interested in buying out our business. These were the two options which we looked at. So we did aggressively pursue option one, which was to get an investor. But unfortunately, if you go to the market space, everybody wants $1 billion exit. And I honestly don't know where $1 billion market exists for products and services. But that was a language which was being spoken in the market space by investors. So, and the people were really not comfortable. The big branded investors were not comfortable when they came to know that you already have a management background, you have been successful to some extent, you are operating with in already 30 different countries with 30 different customers. So somehow these metrics were not palatable and comfortable to the investors, which ideally should have been. So we were slowly realizing that getting an investment with a branded person is not going to happen. So then we said fine, then we need to focus our energy on trying to engineer an exit. So this was the primary reason as to why we said we want to exit our particular business or engineer a sale in our context. Now the point is so you have decided you want to make an exit. I mean, but how do you make it happen? I mean, can you do it tomorrow, day after tomorrow? You have decided today, yes, that is the route I want to take, but how do you make it happen? Now, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I wanted to leave you with the three key takeaways from this presentation. So first key takeaway is you as a founder or a promoter of the company, you at some point of time, if you decide you want to make a sale or an exit, there's nothing wrong with it, but you need to have 100% clarity in your mind as to why you want to do it. Now, if you don't have the clarity in your mind, you will not be able to make a transaction happen. Get that very clear from me. This is, I'm talking from personal experience. You need to have 100% clarity on why you want to make a sale happen. So this is my first key takeaway for you guys today evening. Next thing is so you have decided you want to sell. Now, what do you do? I mean, how do you go about it? I mean, you know that you can have a strategic fit with the company A, but can you go and tell company A yeah, I mean, there is a fit between your business model and mine. Why don't you acquire me? You can't do that. So how do you go about doing that? So we said the first question, or rather I asked myself is, why should somebody buy my company? Because at the end of the day, buying a company is not the same as trying to go and pitch your product or service to a prospect and trying to make a sale. This is completely different. I mean, why should somebody buy you? Now it took a lot of introspection from my side to come up with an honest answer, because when I started thinking about it, I couldn't come up with more than one or two answers as to why somebody should buy me. Now that made me a little bit sort of jittery or uncomfortable at that point in time. Then I said, there is no point in getting jittery. I mean, I have to face the reality in the sense I have created this. Now I have to find a solution as to how to make it attractive to somebody, because it's not that what we were doing was unattractive also. It's just that the market conditions had changed a little bit, which was making things look slightly distorted. So one way I thought was if I find a strategic fit with somebody, let me create a relationship with that company and have a joint to go to market strategy. Because what that will enable me to do is, if we happen to win a project together, first thing is it will help us to execute the project together, because of which he can see how we are working, how we are handling the customer, and that can help us build a business case with a potential buyer, and sort of build a case with him that we would be okay to get acquired, because it could be in the larger interest of creating a bigger market and growing the pie. So that was my thought process, and my thought process was validated, and some transactions or potential discussions happened with some buyers on that particular model. The second thing what I did was also I employed a sort of M&A advisor, but I wouldn't advise that approach to everyone else, because it is not a sure shot success model. Because employing an M&A advisor comes with a cost. Every month you need to pay us some amount as a retainer fee, and you basically don't get any output or deliverable for that. So my experience has not been positive working with M&A advisors, but I would not say it would be the same if it is for others, because I also know some cases where people have worked with M&A advisors, and that particular model has also worked out for them. So in my case, it didn't turn out to be. So primarily, we had two routes. One was this relationship route, and the other was having an M&A advisor. Now, the key thing in this is now if you decide okay, company A could be a potential buyer, he might be interested in this. Now, the key thing to be answered here is why does he need to buy you? What happens if he doesn't buy you? I mean, in our case, we had a bunch of whatever, some 70 odd guys. Can't some big company like IBM or HP or whatever, Capgemini, can't they create a team of 70 members? How difficult it is to create for them? Or can't they put some 10 headhunting consulting guys and poach all my team members? They were doing it, but they weren't successful fully. So I was thinking, so could that, that be a reason? Why should they acquire? So in your case, similarly, you need to figure out why is the buyer trying to buy you out, or why is he evincing interest in the first place. Now, if this is very, very critical, this is my second takeaway which I want to give to you guys today. Why should the buyer buy? Now, if you're able to get the answer for this in your mind clearly, the next thing what will automatically fall out from that is you will be able to get the answer for what is the valuation of my firm, what is the value of my firm. Generally, people think it is a very complex exercise. We need to go through this model, that model, and so on. Actually, none of them is true in the marketplace. If you know the reason why the buyer wants to buy you, you will automatically know what is the valuation. Generally, there are 5 or 6 themes on which a buyer evinces interest or expresses interest to buy another company. It could be that you are working on some new technology, or you have brought in a new product into the marketplace, which fundamentally changes the way business is being done. Or it could be a growth strategy, or it could be market presence, or it could be the absence in a particular vertical, or it could just be plain they just want to kill the competition. The reasons could be any. Now, you need to figure out what is the reason in your particular case. If you figure out what is the reason in your particular case, as I said, this is the most critical thing. If you figure that out, then automatically valuation will be known, because finally it will come to just choosing your EBITDA number. EBITDA basically stands for earnings before interest and depreciation. So you will get a multiple on that particular item. So whether they are going to give you 8x or 10x or 12x, it depends upon what is the reason for buying and how well you are able to negotiate and convince them. Now, the moment you have taken a decision that you want to sell, the other thing what you need to do is see, the moment you start engaging with a potential buyer, when you start engaging with them, it's a long drawn out process. It doesn't happen overnight or something like that. So what happens is, one, your time and energy gets sucked away into handling all the queries and doing the due diligence with the potential buyer. You know, this time is coming at a cost of you being in the marketplace and not being able to grow your revenue. Now, though the buyer is doing this with you, there is no guarantee that he is going to buy you at the end of it. It may so happen, like, you have spent 4 months or 5 months, and it may not conclude in a transaction for whatever reason, but you are forced to go through it. So the first thing which you need to do is you need to release some amount of your management bandwidth, and that can happen by empowering your first level team to take some decisions, at least on running the basic operations in terms of whatever project is there, whatever resource allocation needs to be done, whatever bugs are coming in the software, and so on. So you have to look at, like, empowering your team so that you are freed up from those activities to carry out these other activities. Then the next point to be kept in mind is, like, see, when you are engaged with the buyer, it is not that you will be successful in your first attempt. I mean, you could be talking to some guy. I mean, that person can say, like, at the end of that particular exercise, I'm not interested. And that same guy could come back to you after 8 months or 1 year and say, like, okay, we were not interested at that point in time. Like, we want to continue the discussion from there. That can happen. Or, like, it can completely fail and you can go with the second person, third person, and so on. In our case, we were successful only with the fifth one. There were 4 other suitors who had come, and every time we were hardly 2 days or a week away from getting a term sheet, and the transaction fell for reasons beyond our control. But we had invested, like, 3 months or 4 months with them at the cost of being in the market, as I mentioned. So we had to take that hit on our chin, and we had to go ahead in the market. Then the most other important point which you need to keep in perspective is, see, generally, as a seller, I mean, once you have taken a decision, also which you need to keep in mind is, particularly if you run your own business for 8 years, 10 years, there might be resistance in the mind, like, to go and work for somebody. But generally, any transaction comes with what is called as a retention clause or a strategy. So you will be forced to work for some time, because payouts are also, like, not 100%. For example, if a value of 100 is assigned, you will not get the 100 on day one. You might get a value upfront payment of anywhere only between 30 to 50. The remaining amount, like, will be linked to milestones and deliverables, which in turn would be linked to the timeline you are staying with the company. So this is something which you need to keep in perspective. If there is a reservation in mind about working in another company for a long time, you need to ensure, like, that you are able to get away from the place in 1 year or 2 years or whatever the case might be. So at this point in time, as I said, 2 points here. So one is, why do you want to sell? And two, why is the buyer wanting to buy you? So the next slide, basically this slide talks about, like, what does the buyer look for, like, from his perspective, how does the things look like? So suppose in case it is a clearly well defined, like, big company, they look for only 2 things. One is whether it makes a strategic fit with their business model, and second is culturally, are you a good fit? If these 2 parameters you get a tick box, I mean, if the check box is ticked, basically, I mean, they will go ahead aggressively with transaction to ensure it basically happens. Okay, before getting into due diligence side, I will just talk a little bit about the approach. If you look at the top part of the slide, I have put in 5 blocks, basically, which says expression of interest, memorandum of understanding, due diligence, term sheet, and integration. So as I said, like, the way it starts is, I mean, if you have a relationship at some point of time, the company which wants to buy you itself, they themselves, I mean, initiate the discussion. They, I mean, express an interest that we are interested in buying you. Now, generally, what happens is, this leads to something what is called as a signing of an MOU. Now, MOU basically says, like, we are interested, so we want to do a due diligence. Is basically what that legal document says. Now, due diligence is a critical process in your whatever sell out strategy. I mean, you need to handle this particular phase of the selling cycle quite carefully, because if you're not careful during this particular process, the transaction can just fall flat. Now, why is due diligence critical? Now, the buyer, what does he know? I mean, he has heard something about you from the market. He has seen you speak. He has seen your customers speak. He has seen what the market is perceiving about you, and so on. Now, these are all information from second hand, third hand. Some of the interactions could be one-to-one with you direct, but there is nothing concrete in hand to say, like, whatever these guys are claiming in the market is the truth about them. So generally what happens is an M&A due diligence team does come from the potential buying company, or they recruit a particular firm to, like, carry out this particular activity on their behalf. The focus, I mean, this particular activity can take anywhere between 3 to 6 months, depending upon size of your company, complexity of operations, and what kind of business you are in. So the focus during this particular period is primarily to first level cutters to ensure, like, the top line figures or whatever you have claimed in your P&L and balance sheet is, like, correct. Now, post that, what they do is they get into a second level of classification to see, like, their main focus is to see how much is the account receivable, what is the aging analysis on that, whether any bad debts which are going to happen has not yet been accounted. So they get into those kind of sort of micro details. Now, the key thing is when you are running your business, we generally tend to take these things for granted and say, like, okay, this is something which needs to be done. I have to file my IT return. I have to do my ROC return. I have to do my minutes of the meeting. I have to have a board meeting every quarter. So we generally take these things because it's not on our priority. Something else occupies our priority. If you're not got your records correct, the moment you take a decision, like, that I want to sell my company, you need to get all these things in order and, like, be ready, because the moment they ask you for information, you would not have any breathing time, like, to look around and scratch for records. Your books need to be in order. And this is one of the thing which goes as a criteria in deciding how much valuation you would get for your firm. Then the next thing which they focus on apart from your financials is the sales. They would be more interested in reading every contract, particularly contracts which are currently on. That means your live projects. Second, proposals which you had submitted. Proposals submitted becomes critical for them, because they would like to know how much liabilities or risk loss you are assuming in your future contracts. Because if they happen to acquire your company, the liability and risk has to be assumed by the buying company also. So these can all be tricky phases, as a small company with about $3 million or $4 million, you might be willing to take certain kind of risk. But for a company which is in billions of dollars, I mean, it can look very stupid as to why somebody would do this kind of a thing. So it is, you have to develop the ability to, like, articulate why you have done something, like, without getting hassled. So you need to exercise a lot of patience, and your temperament would be tested during this particular phase. Now, what can happen is sometimes these discussions can become very nasty. It can become, like, as if it is not moving anywhere. So one of the routes which you can take is generally from the company which wants to buy you out, there would be some sponsor or some sympathizer who would, like, pushing your interest. Now you need to keep a dialogue or a conversation going with them and tell him, like, if you hit a roadblock, that this is what is happening, and you would like to find a way out from this. So if there is a sponsor, he will ensure, like, those things are pushed inside. From a HR perspective, again, like, your employee records, your leave records, whatever salary you have paid, whether the PF has been paid, all that, like, again becomes critical. Now, basically what happens is if you get through this due diligence stage, it will again come back to a discussion on the valuation. And if the numbers are fine, I mean, it leads to signing of a term sheet. Now, the critical point, what you need to remember is the person who wants to buy your business out he will be there only during expression of interest stage, and he will be probably there to some extent during signing the memorandum. But during the due diligence stage, your sympathizer or sponsor will not be there with you. 99% of the time, you will be discussing with the finance and the legal team, and that can get very difficult or nasty, as I said. So you need to ensure that you maintain your temperament or cool during this particular phase and navigate through this. And then, okay, this particular slide basically talks about the model. So the moment we say a transaction or an acquisition, I mean, it sort of creates excitement in the minds of the people, because you read in the media about company A bought company B for millions or billions of dollars and so on. Yeah, those kind of transactions do happen in the market. But what doesn't get reported is there are a lot of small and medium-sized transactions which also do happen in the market space, which do not get reported. Now, the shape and the contours of how this transaction takes place need not necessarily be an 100% acquisition. It can take a different model of a merger or a management buyout or a plain simple an asset sale. Basically, asset sale is nothing but the buyer gets the option of cherry picking. For example, in our case, we had a cherry picking thing. We had a services side when we had a products business. The buyer only wanted our services business. He was not interested in our products because it never fitted with their business model. So you need to see, what kind of a transaction gets engineered across as you go through this particular stage. And finally, one thing also I want to mention at this point of time is the word exit or acquisition, it sort of kindles up a lot of images in several people's mind. It is not so romantic or anything great as it is made out to be, and it need not necessarily be a successful one as it is made out to be. So as I said, it can be a plain simple vanilla transaction, not with some millions of dollars. It may not be millions of dollars, but some small millions of dollars it could be. So that is on model and approach. So the next two slides basically talks about activities and timelines. So this would come into question, if you are successfully caused the due diligence, and if you have successfully managed to put a signature on the term sheet, you get into integration activities. So I had put a sample integration activity which could happen during this particular phase. And also the timelines. Generally, the acquiring firm tries to absorb the firm within a 90-day or a 100-day plan and get into business as usual mode. So this can vary again, depending upon the size and complexity of business. So that sort of brings us to the end of this presentation. So as I said, I would like to leave you with three key takeaways in this presentation. So the first point is, why do you want to sell? Second point is, why should somebody buy you out? And the third point, which I have not mentioned in this presentation, is as founders or promoters, when we go through this particular exercise, somewhere our vision or outlook tends to get very narrow. I would request to keep all your stakeholders' interest also in perspective, who may not be part of the discussion. Stakeholders would all be your customers, your employees, your suppliers, partners, vendors. Ensure that their interests are not damaged just because they don't have a say, just don't go ahead with a roughshod transaction. Ensure everybody's interest is protected. So on that note, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I would like to leave the floor open to you guys for any question.
Prakash, let me kind of point one question. So Vivek has asked a question. I guess exits would be rare at this point. If a founder wants to exit, what would you suggest?
Sorry, Tillai, your voice broke. Can you come back a little slowly?
Yes. So this is a question from Vivek. So he said that at this point, exits would be rare. I guess he meaning the economy the way it is today. So if a founder wants to exit, what would you suggest in the current environment?
Okay, let me put it this way. Even in good times, it's not that if you want exit to happen, it will happen tomorrow. You have to put the fishing rod into the water and just wait for the fish to come. So it's not that because the times are bad right now, you can't make it happen, or if times are good, you can make it happen next week. So both the scenarios are not correct. Things never happen in business for your urgency. Things happen when it has to happen. So whenever the transaction is destined to happen, it will happen. You have to just work towards it and bide your time.
Okay, thanks.
So Prakash, there's one more question that has come from Kalyan.
Yeah.
He's mentioned that valuation options such as EBITDA, top line, etc. Is it negotiated, or are there some guidance for product vis-a-vis services business?
Yeah, generally what happens is for services business, it's quite easy to put a EBITDA multiple. I mean, that's industry practice. But for a product business, I mean, you may not have big financials. So it might be possible you might have 20 clients or 30 clients, but you may not have a great top line. So because you don't have a great top line, you don't have any bottom line in the first place. So then other things comes into play, like, how fundamentally is your product changing the business? Whether can I just go with the customer count? Can I go with market presence? Can I go with market share and so on? So the criteria which should be used by the buyer and by you could be quite different from context to context. And obviously there would be a difference between products and services, as you had rightly pointed out. But what that particular criteria is going to be is subject of negotiation. It is purely left to the individual as to how well you're able to negotiate the particular.
So that is the question from Joseph Anthony. So he says, is a sale the only exit option? So this question from Joseph Anthony, he wants to know, is sale the only exit option?
Yeah, I mean, if you are from my perspective, again, like, if you have decided exit, what else could it mean? I mean, you want to hand over the ownership to somebody else and move on for a certain value. Now, whether you are able to do that, if it happens, it is great. If it doesn't happen, then, like, what do? You will have to close your business. I mean, get into a stop loss position and, like, go on with the next thing in life. I mean, that's how you will have to look at it. So that's why I said, like, in my slide, an exit does not necessarily mean a success. From whose perspective is it critical? And one could exit for different reasons. I mean, there might be no buyers, but you may not want to continue in the business. You can just close the business, shut down the business and move on. That is also an exit. I'm not sure whether I answered your question, but that's what I can tell for your question.
So there is this question from Darshan Ganguly. He says that, like, does one look at exit strategies on a periodic basis and revisit it so that value creation for the promoter and current investors can be established?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. See, I mean, I had made my whatever transaction for my company happen in 2016. So post the transaction happening, for example, in my case, I've been introspecting whether it was the correct thing to do. For some time, I was feeling like, probably we should have bitten the bullet and, like, stayed in the game and taken the pain and tried to do things. But if you see today's context, what would have happened? Your revenue tab is closed, your expense tab is going on, and even when things resume back, we know what is going to happen. Things are not going to be normal. So everything is at a point in time. At that particular point in time, if you are convinced about an exit is a thing, and if it happens, fine. If you have said I want to do it, and if it doesn't happen, that is also fine. You need not worry about it. Because what looks correct at a certain point in time looks stupid or foolish after some point in time.
Thanks, Prakash. There's a question from Ajit where he wants to know what leadership level in the potential buyer organization should one target to engage in exit-related discussions?
Okay, see, you generally if it is whichever firm is trying to acquire you, obviously there is a board and a CEO or the managing director is the one who has to finally take a call. But whether you are capable of engaging with them on a one-on-one basis to make a transaction happen can be questionable. I mean, depending upon the size of the firm. For example, we did not meet the CEO or MD of Wipro at any point in time. It was a business unit head who was running the BFSI practice with whom we were engaging with. So it depends upon the context. So, I mean, as I said, given the size of our firm, our thing could get settled at a BU unit head. But suppose say, we were 10 times or 50 times bigger than whatever we were. Obviously, the CEO would get involved, and potential investors, markets have to be informed prior hand, and so on. A lot of compliance things would be in place. So many times it may not be in your control as to even if you know that he is the decision maker, you may not be able to engage with him. And that is where having an M&A advisor could come in handy, because they might have the contacts into that particular level. So yes, I mean, if you can reach the topmost level, great. But if it is not, it does not mean that transactions do not happen. Size and context always comes into picture. Size and context decides who engages and starts and pushes the transaction.
Okay, Neeraj Das has this interesting question. What is your take on mergers? Man, I think you're talking about an acquisition, but he wants to know what is your take on mergers?
Yeah, I see. Mergers primarily, I mean, what happens? I mean, two equal sized entities who have a similar thought process. And if it is an amicable discussion between them, generally sort of results in a merger. But these are generally happens with very large firms. The one which comes to my mind as I'm talking to you is HP took over Compaq. I mean, if you guys remember, there was a hardware vendor called Compaq at some point in time. So that was a merger kind of transaction. It is in those kind of contexts, generally merger happens. Or in an Indian context, I know one merger which happened, but then those were they had a balance sheet of about 200 crores. I mean, that is the size you're talking of if you are talking of a merger. Again, size of the balance sheet becomes critical to decide the contours of the transaction.
So this is a question from Arushi Gupta, where she asks, what exit strategies are investors going to take considering the current uncertain macro conditions?
I wish I had an answer for that question. So, I mean, what exit strategy can you have at this point in time? You have to just bide your time and wait for better times, to engineer a strategy. I mean, it's the same as entering into a stock market. I mean, the markets are down. If you had entered and if your portfolio has gone down, do you exit? I know some people exited the market, for example, 10 days back, but the Sensex is back again by about 3,000 or 4,000 points. So are you going to feel unhappy that you stopped your loss, or you're going to feel more unhappy that the market went up again? So it all depends upon your conviction with what perspective have you first made the investment, because ups and downs are part of life. You cannot be reacting to things which happen in the marketplace. If your conviction is correct as to why you put money into a certain thing, it will be a question of time before you realize your objective.
Okay, so let me ask the participants if they have any further questions. I also would like to mention all the participants that we will share the presentation that Prakash has used today, so that you can refer it whenever you feel the need to, or share it in your network. So after the session today, we will share the presentation that he has used. Anandi Prabha has actually asked one question which is related to the previous question. What strategies are need to be taken by new investors?
That's what, see, I mean, market conditions keep changing. I mean, whatever happens in the market is not in your control beyond the point. 2000, you had the dot-com crash. 2008, you had a Lehman Brothers crisis. In between, markets went down and crashed for XYZ reasons. Now, even though all these events have taken place in front of our eyes, it's not that investors did not put money into companies or there were no new investments made. It depends upon your conviction as to what is that you want. If you had raised a fund, your fund is generally going to be there for about 7 years or 10 years, and you have to give a certain amount of return to the investor at the end of the time period. So investors will make investment. Something which would probably be saleable post 7 years or 10 years from now is what an investor would look at. What is that I would be able to sell, or what is that the market would require 7 years or 10 years from now? If you have the answer to that question, you can put the money there.
Okay, so we have almost reached the end of this session. So one final question that has come from Subhash Narayan. He would like to know how much time would it usually take to get a complete exit from a company?
I mean, if you start the process today, it again depends upon the size and complexity of your business. If it is a small business, it could happen sometime in 3 months. If it is a long drawn out process, if you are a big company with operations in multiple countries, it can take anywhere up to 18 months also. There's no one standard time frame. It purely depends upon your size. Size determines the time frame.
Okay, Prakash, I think people have enjoyed this session very much, and the way in which you have lucidly put the entire process, and more importantly, giving a personal touch to your journey. That I think is wonderful. So we've had a mix of participants. There are people who are interested in learning about acquisitions and exits and all from a academic perspective. They are also here. Obviously, there are several entrepreneurs, and in fact, large portion of them are entrepreneurs. And there are people who are involved in the startup sector. They are all here. I'm sure they all would have taken these three key things that you highlighted, and hopefully that will add to the inventory of other things that we already have. So thank you so much. Is there any other last few points that you would like to share with the group, and then we can close the session?
No, nothing from my side. I mean, whatever is happening now is unfortunate, but I think this will pass. And I wish you guys the good luck in your journey.
Okay, thanks, Prakash. Very nice of you to spend time with the group. Shall we close this session?
Yeah, I'm fine. If there are no further questions, we can conclude the session.
Okay, participants,
Thank you,
thanks
sir.
everybody for joining and making it very engaging with the questions.
Thank you, sir.
Shruti, you would like to add any comments?
Thank you for your information.
So thank you all for joining us today. And we hope to see you in our upcoming webinars as well. And if anybody has any questions that you've not already asked, please feel free to reach out to me. So thank you all again for joining us today.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am.